In 1999, Nigerian soldiers fired dozens of military rounds at a 19-year-old boy. Nothing happened. The weapons jammed. The soldiers ran. For 20 years, nobody found a way to stop him. Not police, not soldiers, not bullets. Until Lagos discovered his one fatal weakness. For over 2 decades, Zekel and his crew were completely untouchable. They robbed banks, hijacked bullion vans, and humiliated the law across Nigeria without spilling a single drop of their own blood. But the power Zekel carried had a dark, hidden condition, and his ultimate downfall wouldn't come from a bullet. It would come from a trap designed to weaponize the one thing his magic couldn't protect. This is his full definitive story. To understand how a human being becomes bulletproof, you have to go back to the night of his birth. Umunze, Anambra State, 1981. Just before midnight, the most feared native doctor in the region, Ikechukwu, locked himself inside his shrine with his newborn son. He used a dark, complex paste he had spent years preparing. He cut 7 distinct marks into the child's body, sealing a blood covenant with forces the village dared not name. Marks on his chest, both wrists, both ankles, his forehead, and the back of his neck. His mother named the boy Chukwuemeka. God has done great things. But years later, that decision would destroy everything. The village saw what he was becoming, and they stopped using his name entirely. They called him Zekel. From the moment he could walk, Zekel was completely unbothered by the world. At age 8, during a street fight, a boy hurled a massive, jagged stone directly at Zekel's head. The stone hit him square in the face and shattered into dust. Zekel didn't bleed. He didn't even blink. He just turned and looked at the boy with cold, empty eyes. By age 12, the rules in Umunze were simple. You either followed Zekel or you stayed entirely out of his way. As Zekel grew, so did his arrogance. One afternoon, he walked into the shop of a notorious corrupt trader named Obiora and simply began carrying out high-value electronics, stacking them in the dirt. Obiora called the police. 4 armed officers arrived at Zekel's compound the next afternoon, demanding Zekel step outside. Zekel walked to the doorway, and then he showed them the true scale of his father's work. Slowly, without visible effort, Zekel began to grow. His body expanded until his shoulders smashed against both sides of the wooden frame. His head rose, scraping the top beam. He became a towering wall of a man, looking down at the officers from a height that wasn't there 30 seconds ago. The sergeant didn't say a word. He took 2 steps back, climbed into his jeep, and drove away. He rewrote his police report 3 times, trying to find words his superiors would believe. But Zekel knew he couldn't rule an empire alone. By the time he was 18, he recruited his 3 closest childhood friends, Emeka, Chidi, and Nonso. He took them into his father's shrine and extended the protection. To test it, Chidi took a heavy, razor-sharp machete and slammed it hard against his own bare forearm. The metal rang out, but the skin remained perfectly smooth. The 4 of them laughed. They felt like gods. But hundreds of kilometers away, in a dim, sterile office in Abuja, a file was opened. A man named Colonel Adeyemi looked at a photo of Zekel and circled the date of his birth. Zekel thought he was invisible, but the hunter had already started calculating the cost of his blood. The jobs got bigger, faster, cleaner. Warehouses, cash offices, banks. The operations were flawless. The moment they entered a building, the air pressure shifted. The human body instinctively knows when it's in the presence of an apex predator. Guards kept their guns holstered. Managers handed over the keys. In Umunze, Zekel was a folk hero, distributing millions to widows and struggling families. but Colonel Adeyemi was watching every single move. Adeyemi knew direct force was useless. You couldn't shoot Zekel, and you couldn't overpower him. So, Adeyemi stopped trying to kill him. He decided to play a completely different game. He decided to seal the space first. The trap was set in Lagos. Adeyemi leaked a highly confidential piece of intelligence. A massive federal contractor payout was being routed to a specific bank branch on Lagos Island. Zekel's informants swallowed the bait. But over the previous 2 weeks, Adeyemi had secretly modified that bank. The standard glass airlock entrance was reinforced with thick, military-grade steel framing, set in poured concrete. The electromagnetic locks were detached from the bank's system and wired to a remote control post across the street, operated by hidden soldiers. At exactly 2:17 p.m. on a Thursday, Zekel and his crew walked in. The operation was perfect. In less than 15 minutes, they had loaded the bags. They walked back into the small airlock capsule to exit to the street. The inner glass door slid shut behind them.
Zekel reached for the outer door. It didn't open. He turned to go back into the lobby. Locked. Both doors had been sealed simultaneously from across the street. They were trapped in an airtight capsule the size of an elevator. Zekel tried to use his shape-shifting power to smash through. He expanded, but the reinforced concrete surround didn't give a millimeter. There was nowhere for his size to go. And here is where the trap became fatal. There was no ventilation, no fresh air coming in. Zekel's charms protected his skin from bullets, but they could not manufacture oxygen out of nothing. One by one, his legendary crew began to suffocate. Chidi collapsed against the wall. Emeka gasped for air, his eyes rolling back. Nonso went completely still on the floor. Zekel was stronger, his covenant deeper, but he knew that within minutes he would pass out too. In that split second of sheer survival panic, Zekel made a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his days. For 20 years, he never left a man behind. This time, he ran. He used the darkest aspect of his power to shrink his physical form down to the size of a fly, buzzing through the hairline gap where the steel doorframe met the poured concrete. The outer door slammed open. Colonel Adeyemi rushed in with rifles raised, expecting to capture 4 supernatural criminals. But on the floor, there were only 3. The capsule had been completely sealed. The 4th man had simply vanished. Zekel didn't stay in hiding. He went to a cheap guest house, turned on the television, and watched the live news broadcast. There they were, Emeka, Chidi, and Nonso, paraded before the cameras by the military, their faces heavily wrapped in thick, bloody white bandages. Colonel Adeyemi knew the crew still possessed their bulletproof charms. His consultants had given him a chilling directive. The magic of these men is directed through their sight. Remove their eyes, and the power loses its direction. When Zekel saw his childhood friends completely mutilated, something inside his soul broke. The radio announced their formal execution was scheduled for dawn at a military black site on the outskirts of Lagos. He knew he was running against a lethal clock. At 1 a.m., the power grid of the execution camp went dark. Zekel walked straight through the main gates. The guards' weapons clicked and jammed the moment they drew close. They didn't even try to fight. They simply backed away into the shadows, leaving the corridors empty. Zekel moved with desperate, quiet speed through the facility. He unlatched the heavy iron bar of the subterranean holding cells and pushed the door open. He expected a fight. He expected to lift his brothers up and carry them out. But when he stepped into the dim light of the cell, he realized the rescue was already over. In the corner of the room, Emeka, Chidi, and Nonso were huddled together, trembling, completely blind, reaching out helplessly into empty space. Zekel dropped to his knees. The strongest man in Nigeria could shatter a steel door with his bare hands, but he could not piece together the broken spirit of his brothers. He could stop a bullet, but he couldn't stop their tears. He reached out to touch Chidi's shoulder. His crew flinched in fear, then recognized the touch. Tears soaked through their blood-stained bandages. Emeka shook his head and whispered, "Zekel, leave us. If you take us out like this, we are just baggage. We can't see the light anymore. Let them face the punishment. Let us rest. Just run." They begged him to let them face the punishment. They didn't want to live as broken trophies in a world they could no longer see. Zekel stood up slowly. A hollow, devastating defeat washed over him. The base around him was silent. Colonel Adeyemi had already boarded an armored vehicle and fled through a hidden rear exit hours ago, leaving nothing but an empty command center. Zekel looked down at his hands. For the first time in his life, his absolute power felt entirely useless. He turned his back on the cells, walked into the shadows of the Lagos night, and disappeared into hiding forever. Zekel fled Lagos. He traveled aimlessly through villages and junctions, a quiet man by the window who never started conversations. For the next 15 years, he chose to live a life of absolute obscurity. He could still feel everything his father built in him, complete, intact, and irreversible. But Kontu ever chose to be human. He stood patiently in lines. He opened doors with his hands. One Wednesday evening in Edo State, he passed a small, zinc-roofed church. He sat outside on a bench, listening to an ordinary pastor speak about a father who ran to embrace his broken, ruined son without asking for his history first. Something that had been tightly sealed inside Zekel since the night of his birth cracked completely open. When the service ended, he walked inside, sat before the pastor, and introduced himself. He didn't use the name Zekel. He used the name his mother gave him before the covenants took over, Emmanuel. Today, if you walk into a small, vibrant church in Enugu on a Sunday morning, you will see a warm, ordinary pastor preaching about grace and redemption. The congregation loves him. None of them know that the gentleman standing before them once stood down an entire military unit. None of them know the horrors he witnessed in a sealed vault in Lagos, or the base he infiltrated in absolute heartbreak. The strongest man in Nigeria survived bullets. He survived soldiers. He survived Lagos. The thing that finally changed him was regret. His name is Emmanuel, and the door behind him is finally open.